Iranian state television has just confirmed it. Khamenei is dead. And within hours, encrypted military channels lit up. Regional militias went silent. Oil markets trembled. In Jerusalem, in Moscow, in Washington, closed-door meetings began before the official morning statements were even finished. But here's the question no one on mainstream broadcasts is daring to ask. Did this single death just remove a leader, or remove the final restraint? For decades, he was the ideological spine of a regime that positioned itself against Israel, against the West, and aligned strategically with Russia and regional proxies. Now that spine is gone. Power vacuums don't stay empty. They pull forces inward. And if you've ever read the prophecy of Gog and Magog, you know it begins with alliances forming in the shadows before the storm becomes visible. So what exactly was set in motion the moment his heart stopped beating? And I have to say this carefully. Prophecy doesn't create events. But sometimes belief in prophecy shapes how leaders interpret events. If key players believe they are living in historic, even apocalyptic times, their risk tolerance changes. And that is where tension truly begins. Because the question is no longer, is Gog and Magog literal? The question becomes, are the alliances described in ancient texts beginning to mirror modern geopolitics more closely than ever before? And if so, who benefits from accelerating that narrative? That's where the story turns. And if that shift happens, you won't hear it announced on television first. You'll see it in subtle signals, sudden joint military drills, increased weapons transfers, proxy groups acting more aggressively, diplomatic language hardening. These are not headlines. They are early warning signs. Russia has strengthened ties with Iran over the last decade. Military cooperation, drone transfers, economic agreements bypassing Western sanctions. China has deepened long-term strategic energy investments. Turkey maneuvers between East and West. Regional Sunni powers watch carefully. Meanwhile, Israel remains on high alert. Personally, when I look at history, I don't fear chaos as much as I fear consolidation. Because chaos is loud, consolidation is quiet. And in the quiet moments after a powerful leader dies, new alliances often form that are more radical than the system they replace. And that brings us to something far bigger than Iran alone. Imagine you're sitting inside the Iranian Revolutionary Guard command structure right now. The supreme leader, your final authority, is suddenly absent. No spiritual shield. No ultimate decision maker. No singular voice that could override factional dispute. When Ayatollah Khamenei ruled, he was not merely a political leader. He was the ideological anchor of Iran's regional strategy. Under his watch, Tehran built a web of influence stretching from Lebanon to Yemen, Hezbollah in the north, militias in Iraq, the Houthis in the south, and a deep military presence in Syria. This wasn't chaos. It was architecture. For decades, he balanced two forces, expansion and restraint. Iran would threaten Israel. Iran would challenge U.S. presence. Iran would enrich uranium just enough to provoke, but not enough to trigger full-scale. The real turning point won't be the funeral. It will be the first strategic move that signals continuity has ended. And when that move comes, it won't ask for permission. It will simply happen. And when it does, the world won't debate theology. It will respond to power. Which brings us to the final and unavoidable question. If this is the beginning of a larger alignment, who ultimately miscalculates first? Here's where tension tightens again. If a future conflict unfolds, it may not begin with tanks crossing borders. It may begin with cyber operations, with regional proxy escalations, with coordinated political pressure, with alliances formalized under the banner of mutual defense. And suddenly, what once seemed like distant prophecy begins to resemble geopolitical reality. Meanwhile, neighboring states are recalculating. Saudi Arabia cautiously re-engaged with Iran in recent years. Turkey balances opportunistically. China invests quietly. The United States reassesses its Middle East footprint. Every major actor is asking the same question. Does this death create vulnerability or opportunity? And that's the breath before the storm. Because history shows us something chilling. When power transitions appear calm on the surface, the true direction of change is often being engineered behind closed doors. And if a new leadership structure emerges that is younger, more technologically adaptive, less restrained by decades of precedent, the next confrontation may not look like the last. I'm not saying we're witnessing Gog and Magog marching tomorrow, but I am saying this. Alignments matter more than headlines, and alignments are forming in real time. There's another layer most people overlook: energy. Iran holds massive oil and gas reserves. Russia's energy leverage has been weaponized before. If these two coordinate more tightly in global energy markets, they gain strategic influence far beyond missiles. Economic power can shift geopolitical gravity without a single shot fired. Now ask yourself something even more unsettling. If Iran emerges internally consolidated and its strategic partnership with Russia deepens further due to shared isolation from Western systems, what does that alignment look like 5 years from now? You don't need prophecy to see patterns. Russia facing NATO pressure, Iran facing sanctions and regional hostility, both strengthening military cooperation, both expanding influence through proxies, and Israel watching closely. Iran's regional posture may not escalate immediately. In fact, it might temporarily soften. Diplomatic gestures, strategic patience, even subtle outreach. Why? Because consolidating internal power requires time. But consolidation doesn't mean moderation. It can mean clarity. If the Revolutionary Guard or a more hardline coalition emerges stronger than before, the next phase won't be reactive. It will be deliberate. And this is where the Gog and Magog narrative re-enters the conversation. The prophecy in Ezekiel doesn't describe chaos within Persia. It describes Persia aligned within a larger coalition, organized, intentional, advancing. Not fractured, unified. So here's the uncomfortable possibility. What if the death of a long-standing supreme leader doesn't destabilize Iran? What if it streamlines it? And here's what fascinates me. Historically, the most transformative shifts don't happen when radicals overthrow a system. They happen when institutions quietly evolve while claiming nothing has changed. Publicly, leaders say, we remain committed to stability. Privately, strategies are rewritten. You expect chaos after a leader like that dies. You expect flames. But what if you don't see them? What if the real shift isn't loud, but structural? Think about this. When a powerful figure dominates a system for decades, he doesn't just control policy. He controls rivalries. He suppresses factions. He balances egos. Remove that figure, and suddenly suppressed ambitions resurface. Now imagine sitting inside Tehran's inner circles. The clerical establishment wants ideological continuity. The Revolutionary Guard wants operational dominance. Younger political actors see opportunity. This isn't just succession. It's recalibration. In the first 48 hours after the official confirmation, something unexpected happened. There was no immediate missile launch, no dramatic declaration of revenge, no mass mobilization. Instead, measured statements, controlled mourning, carefully chosen words about continuity and stability. Markets dipped, then steadied. Regional proxies remained alert but restrained. At first glance, it looked almost anticlimactic. And that's exactly why analysts began to worry. Because sometimes the most dangerous moments in geopolitics aren't explosive. They're silent. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe this is simply another political transition, or the early stage of a larger alignment that could redefine global power? Write your perspective below. If you found this analysis valuable, support the channel so we can continue breaking down complex global events without noise or fear-driven narratives. And if you want to understand how future flashpoints could unfold, especially the role of energy, cyber warfare, and proxy conflicts, watch the next video appearing on your screen right now. Because this story is still unfolding. The ultimate consequence may not be a single dramatic war. It may be the gradual division of the world into hardened blocks: economic, military, ideological. And in that environment, a single spark carries disproportionate weight. Khamenei's death may be remembered not as the trigger of an immediate explosion, but as the moment the final restraint was removed from a system already leaning toward confrontation. That is the real shift. That is the real consequence. And if there is a villain in this story, it isn't a single nation. It's unchecked escalation. It's ideological absolutism. It's leadership that mistakes destiny for permission. And history shows those forces always face consequences. Empires overreach. Coalitions fracture. Overconfidence invites backlash. Justice in geopolitics doesn't arrive as morality. It arrives as consequence. And any power block that accelerates too aggressively eventually meets resistance strong enough to correct it. That is the balancing force of history. I don't believe history is inevitable, but I do believe patterns are undeniable. When a long-standing ideological leader dies, and the structure that replaces him is younger, more networked, less constrained by legacy diplomacy, momentum builds. Not instantly, not theatrically, but steadily. And steady momentum is harder to stop than sudden chaos. You wanted to know whether Gog and Magog are forming. Here's the sober answer. Prophecy aside, alliances are solidifying. Power blocks are hardening. Ideological states are finding common ground against a shared adversarial system. That doesn't guarantee apocalypse, but it guarantees tension. And tension at this scale always tests the limits of restraint. The first major signal comes subtly. A coordinated military exercise larger than previous ones. Joint defense agreements strengthened. Intelligence sharing deepened. Proxy forces acting with unusual synchronization. Then a flashpoint ignites. Not necessarily a full invasion. Not immediately. A miscalculated strike. A border escalation. A retaliation cycle that moves faster than diplomats can contain. Markets plunge. Energy routes destabilize. Global powers are forced to take sides. The coalition that once seemed theoretical becomes visible. And here is the payment. The vacuum left by Khamenei's death did not produce chaos. It produced clarity. Iran emerges not weaker, but more streamlined. Russia not isolated, but more aligned. Regional tensions not diffused, but recalibrated toward a larger confrontation. Here's my conviction. The danger isn't that prophecy exists. The danger is when leaders believe they are part of it. When decision makers interpret current events not merely through strategy, but through destiny, their calculations change. Risk tolerance increases. Compromise weakens. Escalation feels historic rather than reckless. And that psychological shift is more powerful than missiles. Now step back and look at the chessboard. Russia remains locked in confrontation with the West. NATO expands pressure. Sanctions deepen. Moscow looks for reliable partners outside Western systems. Iran, more isolated but more consolidated, offers military cooperation, drones, energy alignment, and shared hostility toward Western dominance. You don't need ancient scrolls to see the geometry forming. But if you are someone who studies Ezekiel 38, you can't ignore the names. Persia, a northern power, a coalition forming with shared objectives. The resemblance doesn't prove prophecy, but it does raise a chilling question. What happens when geopolitical necessity aligns with apocalyptic belief? Power transitions in revolutionary regimes rarely end in moderation. History shows a pattern. When an ideological state loses a central, aging authority, two outcomes compete: fragmentation or consolidation. And in systems built on control, consolidation almost always wins. Within months, the internal struggle in Tehran sharpens. The Revolutionary Guard doesn't stage a dramatic coup. It doesn't need to. It already controls vast military assets, intelligence networks, and economic sectors. Quietly, its influence expands further. Publicly, speeches emphasize unity. Privately, operational doctrines evolve. Missile programs accelerate. Cyber capabilities expand. Proxy coordination becomes more synchronized. Not chaotic, strategic.